Hi, Professor Grunlin here. Hey, take a few nice breaths. And then let's talk about the respiratory system. The respiratory system structures are often referred to as the upper airways and the lower airways. Physicians refer to the cold, sinusitis, tonsillitis, etc. as upper respiratory infections, while influenza, pneumonia, bronchitis are all referred to as lower respiratory infections. The upper respiratory structures include the nose, nasal cavity, sinuses, and pharynx. The pharynx is commonly referred to as the throat. These structures conduct air into and out of the body. They also warm, moisten, and filter the incoming air, and the nasal cavity houses your olfactory receptors. The lower respiratory structures include the larynx, the trachea, and the bronchial tree, which is located inside your lungs. The larynx is commonly referred to as your voice box because it houses your vocal cords. In addition to vocalization, the lower respiratory structures are involved with pH homeostasis and gas exchange. Oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. Ventilation, that is, getting air into the body and out of the body, is actually really easy to understand. If you ever watched a weather forecast, you know that air moves from a place of high pressure to a place of low pressure, and the bigger the pressure difference, the faster it moves. This is all very similar to diffusion. Molecules move from a place of high concentration to a place of low concentration. So, if you want air to move, you just need to have a pressure difference. Here's where it helps to be familiar with this guy named Boyle and his famous gas law. Boyle's law says that if temperature is relatively constant, then if you increase volume, it will decrease pressure, and vice versa. Pretty cool, huh? That means to change pressure, all you need to do is change volume. Now, do me a favor. Take just a regular breath in. You should be able to feel a change in the volume in your thoracic cavity. You should feel your rib cage go up, your diaphragm go down. These movements cause an increase in volume in the thoracic cavity, and according to Boyle's law, that means that since the volume went up, the pressure of the air inside the lungs went down. Now compare the new lower air pressure inside the lungs to the air pressure outside the body, and you can quickly figure out why air moves into the lungs. Think back to your Anatomy and Physiology 1 course. You may remember that you studied muscles that functioned in respiration. In fact, during normal, relaxed respiration, contraction of your external intercostal muscles raises your rib cage, and contraction of the diaphragm lowers the floor of your thoracic cavity. This results in inspiration. Take another breath. Now pay attention to the exhalation. Can you feel those muscles relax back to their resting positions? Could you see and feel the decrease of the space in the thoracic cavity? Back to Boyle's law. We now have less volume and therefore more pressure. Now the air pressure inside the lungs is higher than out in the air outside, so air moves out of the body. We exhale. So, to accomplish normal ventilation, the respiratory center in the medulla oblongata just needs to send innervation to those two muscle groups for just a couple of seconds, about 12 to 16 times per minute. But sometimes we breathe faster or slower or deeper or shallower. Take a really deep breath in. Can you feel that? More muscles are involved. The thoracic volume increases more, so more air flows into the body. Now, exhale forcefully. Can you feel that? It's not just those muscles relaxing. Now other muscles like the abdominals are contracting to make that cavity even smaller and force more air out. We're going to take a look at some of the factors like exercise, blood pH homeostasis, oxygen levels, carbon dioxide levels, etc. that cause us to change our breathing rates and depth. During ventilation, air comes in through the nose, flows into the nasal cavity, down the pharynx and the trachea, and from there into the bronchial tree in the lungs. We have two primary bronchi, one going into each lung. From there, it branches to secondary bronchi, which go into the lobes. We have 2 lobes in our left lung and 3 lobes in our right. From there, air flows into the tertiary bronchi, then into bronchioles, into tiny little terminal and respiratory bronchioles. At the end of the trip, the air is trapped in these tiny little air spaces called alveoli. During exhalation, the trip is just reversed. Each alveolus has capillaries that branched from the pulmonary arteries and veins clinging to their surface. The very thin interface between the inside of the alveolus and the inside of the capillary is called the respiratory membrane. It consists of a thin, simple squamous epithelium of the alveolus, thin, simple squamous epithelium called endothelium of the capillary, and a thin fused basement membrane. The purpose for all that thinness is to facilitate very quick, efficient diffusion of gases. Anything that disrupts the amount of surface or the thinness of that interface, like emphysema or pneumonia, will affect the gas diffusion. To understand the actual exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, let's apply a few more of those gas laws. Dalton's law explains that in a mixture of air, the total pressure equals the sum of all of the partial pressures. It's interesting to note that the air around you is about 78% nitrogen and 21% oxygen. The rest is carbon dioxide, argon, hydrogen, etc. The partial pressures of these gases add up to our atmospheric pressure, which around sea level at most times is around 760 millimeters of mercury. Another gas law, Henry's law, is handy for looking at the actual exchange of the gases in the body. Part of his law says that at given temperature and pressure, gases dissolve in a liquid in proportion to their partial pressures. The higher the concentration of the gas, the faster it's going to go into solution. But there's a catch. The total amount that will go into solution depends on the solubility of that gas in that liquid at that temperature and pressure. This explains why we don't end up with a lot of nitrogen in our blood. Nitrogen is almost insoluble in our blood. The deoxygenated blood coming from the right ventricle through the pulmonary arteries has a partial pressure for oxygen of about 40 and 45 for carbon dioxide. The air inside the lungs, on the other hand, has a partial pressure of about 100 for oxygen and 40 for carbon dioxide. This means that the oxygen will move from its higher pressure in the alveoli across that respiratory membrane into the blood, where it will attach to the hemoglobin inside those red blood cells. Oxygen, unlike nitrogen, is soluble in your blood. Carbon dioxide will travel across the respiratory membrane the opposite direction. It will move from the blood to the lower carbon dioxide pressure in the alveolus. It takes only about 1/4 of a second for this exchange to occur. The blood leaving the lungs, going back through the pulmonary veins to the left atrium, now have a partial pressure of 100 for oxygen and 40 for carbon dioxide. The left ventricle will pump that now oxygenated blood to the body, and when it reaches the capillary beds, the reactions will be reversed. The oxygen will be unloaded into the tissues, and the waste carbon dioxide will enter the bloods for return to the lungs. Remember that down in those tissues, all those cells have been continuously using up the oxygen to make ATP via aerobic respiration, and in the process, making carbon dioxide. So in the tissues near the arteriole end of the capillary, carbon dioxide partial pressure is higher and oxygen partial pressure is lower than in the blood. All day, every day of your life, this cycle between the tissues, the heart, and the lungs continues. Well, that should get you started on your learning objectives for the respiratory system. Contact me with your questions, and don't forget to breathe.